I would ask everyone to find their seats and call the meeting to order. I believe the first item is the change in the meeting protocol for this meeting only, and there's a resolution that's at everyone's seat because of the uncertainty as to the membership of the Board of Curators at this very time. We're asking that we forego the actual formal meeting of the committees, and the Board of Curators will take up each of the action items as the board, with the chairman of the respective committees leading the discussion. As a practical matter, the only difference will be we will not be having committee votes on the action items. So, Chair would entertain a motion to adopt the resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Okay, all votes in favor.
The first item is review of the consent agenda. The consent agenda was sent out with the board materials. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any curator would want to be removed before we consider it tomorrow? Hearing none, we will take up those items tomorrow on the consent agenda. The next item is we need a resolution to go into executive session. That's located on page 8 of your materials. Is there a motion for that?
Move that we move into executive session.
Second.
I think we're moving into executive session later in the day, but. Okay. Cindy, call the roll.
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
First item on the agenda is the Finance Committee matters, and I would turn the floor over to Curator Covington to lead that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice President Burnett will be presenting 3 items, all of which require action. The first of which are the tuition and required fees and student housing and dining rates. Ryan?
Thank you, Curator Covington, and good morning, members of the board. Today we bring before you the fiscal year 2015-2016 tuition and required fees, as well as recommendations on student housing and dining rates across all 4 campuses. Just for some review with respect to tuition, you've seen this slide before. We presented this in December, but it's clear that our tuition rates have been very competitive compared to surrounding states. When you look at public universities in the Midwest, around Missouri, and over the last, we've had smaller fee increases over the last 5 years than just about anyone around us if you look at this chart. And we're just reminding you that and this year is going to be no exception when it comes to general tuition. One other slide just to put it into context for the board, and I know we have some new members, is this is the 5-year percentage change in tuition and fees put together by the College Board on annual surveys, and you can note that Missouri's right at the bottom or second from the bottom among all 50 states with respect to public higher education. So this comparison, and this slide, which is number 30 in your packet, shows you what the doctoral schools' tuition and fees in the current year and what the change looks like from year over year. And you can see that over the last year, MU, UMKC, S&T, and UMSL were all below the public doctoral national average of tuition and fees. And this is a chart we've put together and shown you before as well. When you look at the total of state support and net tuition and fees, as the major contributors, the lion's share of the contributors to our educational enterprise across all 4 campuses, and you look at what it was in 2001, adjusted for inflation, you can see that there's literally all the university as a whole is operating with 28% less tuition and fees than it was in 2001. And this is not uncommon across the United States, but it's very pronounced here in Missouri. The other piece in play, as you know, is the limit on raising tuition across the board to the level of CPI. We pulled this chart together for you. This is a new one to show you what the CPI is built on. And this is from the U.S. Department of Commerce. And on the left is the CPI market basket. And I would note to you that over 40% of that is housing or rent. And clearly, with oil prices falling, transportation actually went negative in the last year, which is great for consumers across the U.S., but it drove the overall CPI down to 0.8 year over year, which is the basis for our recommendation on tuition rates. Contrast that with the pie chart on the right, where what we would call the University of Missouri's market basket doesn't look anything like the CPI or what the typical household expenses are for the average citizen in the U.S. 77% of our expenses are for people. We're a very labor-intensive business, and that's just the way it is for public higher education, private higher education in our country. And you can see we broke down. We estimated what the other operating expenses, M&R and equipment, debt service at just 2%, fuel and utilities. So while we will see some reduction in the fuel and utilities, at least modestly, we're not going to see the reduction that a consumer would see. And overall, we think these costs are going to grow by 2 to 3% as we try and take care of I would submit to you, our most important resource, our staff and faculty on our campuses. Just to remind you that the cost of a 1% increase in salary and wages across the whole system is roughly $8.6 million, and that equates to about a 2% increase across the board on tuition rates. As we also noted, as part of our efficiency and effectiveness and work that's been done, the benefit rate will remain unchanged, so that will help us on the cost side next year, and it will remain unchanged at least for another year as well after this upcoming fiscal year. So what does this look like for the revenue for our educational enterprise? This pie chart would show you that Governor Nixon's recommendation that came out in the State of the State address was that our state core appropriation would increase by 1.3%, or about $5.7 million. That's certainly early in the legislature. We have see what the legislature is able to do. The president testified earlier this week in the House side and asking for something north of 1.3%, but it remains to be seen what the state's going to be able to do for us on our core appropriation. The net tuition and fees recommendation that's in your agenda item, when you put together 0.8 for residents of Missouri undergrad, and you look at the different rates that are detailed for non-residents and for professional schools, would yield about a 1.4% increase in net tuition and fees across the entire University of Missouri system, about $8.6 million. Again, this is not a big movement of the pie. Both of these things are less than 1.5%, and they're the two big pieces of the pillars that fund the educational enterprise. Just a reminder that the Higher Education Student Funding Act, Senate Bill 389, undergraduate tuition and fees are governed by this act. These fees typically include base tuition, IT fees, activity fees. It does modify the definition that any fees that are approved by the students and subsequently approved by the Board of Curators are exempted from Senate Bill 389, and we have one of those in front of you today at S&T. So here's what the rates would look like. The change is very modest, I think, at 0.8%, about a $76 annual change for students at MU, $74 at UMSL, $75 at S&T. It's all about the rounding in these places, but overall about a $74 increase in base tuition for resident undergraduate students on the 4 campuses. And this shows you the rate per hour and the change. We do note in this slide that the St. Louis campus will be implementing its recreation center fee within its tuition base as that building becomes operational and needs to be funded for both debt service and operation. So we're showing you that. That was a prior approval by the Board of Curators for that fees, but we're showing that to you. Metropolitan undergraduate tuition rates would also increase in inflation. That's at both the Kansas City and the St. Louis campuses. Our proposed tuition for non-residents and graduate students is, it varies by campus, and it's based on the market that they think they can sustain and continue to bring in the students that help subsidize the cost for in-state students. And so you can see the MU campus looking at 3% on non-resident undergrad, whereas Kansas City's staying at inflation. S&T's also at 3%, and the St. Louis campus is at 2.9. So these are fees that would be charged to residents not of the state of Missouri, and also not subject to Senate Bill 389. We do have one tuition differential before you. It is at the Kansas City campus for graduate nursing tuition. And there's a number of areas that they would like to raise that with the needs that they have, and a very strong demand program in graduate nursing. And those are detailed in your packet, but the residents and the non-residents would see an increase in both 16 and 17. It would be phased in over 2 years. And the proposal this year would be for you to approve the first year, and it would bring in about $300,000 in new revenue to the nursing school at Kansas City. And this big long list, it's a little tough to look at, is all the professional students in all the different campuses. You can see that we have professional schools on 3 of our 4 campuses. And should point out at the top, MU Law, that is the same dollar amount for resident and non-resident, even though the rate's different, because of obviously the non-residents are paying more at the law school now. And to show you that all of our fees stay in compliance with Senate Bill 389, on the undergraduate side, you can see here's the net increase in activity, facility, and service fees would be capped at 0.8%. At Kansas City as well, 0.8. At Missouri S&T, this increase is 2.4 this year because of a student services fee that student government approved. So that is subject to your approval, but it does meet the requirements of Senate Bill 389. And then on the graduate and professional side, you can see that overall in required fees, they're 0.7 at MU, 0.8 at Kansas City, and 2.5 again with the increase that would apply to both graduate students and undergraduate students at S&T. And then what we show you here are the housing and dining rates that are proposed, that are approved each year by the board. The predominant plan, obviously there's a myriad of plans on each campus to give students choices around how many meals they have, what type of room accommodations they have, but the most predominant plan is listed here for you. So at MU, those would go up by 3.3%, Kansas City 3.2%, S&T 3.2%, and the St. Louis campus 0.8%. So those are the rates that are in your materials, and we showed those to you in December as well. So that's a quick run through of what we've talked about before, and happy to take any questions.
Questions for Brian? Brian, I'd like to just say thank you, and thank you to your staff and Cuba in particular for responding since our January meeting of the Finance Committee to being so responsive to some of the curators' requests, and of course for adjusting to the unfortunate decrease in CPI. But thank you, everybody, for all the heavy lifting that you've done since our January Finance meeting.
It's a team effort between, thank you. It's a team effort between the campuses and our system office. Thank you.
Questions for Brian with respect to this particular item? Comments, David?
Well, I have some comments, and I'm going to take longer than I should, and I'll try to not do this elsewise, except I feel pretty strongly about this. I will say I feel overwhelmed by the issues that you're facing, Brian. And I know how difficult they are, and I appreciate your efforts a great deal. And I want to say, too, I think the whole administration, President Wolf, your whole team, have been outstanding in some of the things you have done with efficiency. I would like to vote against tuition. I don't know how this is presented in these questions exactly. I have concerns with a lot of the fee increases. And because I intend to vote no, I want to take some time to explain why to you. And I appreciate your indulgence and the other members of the board. And I don't like the fees, but other members of the curators can speak to that more eloquently than me. I think they do accomplish de facto a differential tuition that I want to talk about for a second. We sell the university, and academics throughout this country sell the university as a return on investment. Where that return on investment is justified, I feel comfortable with voting for increased fees. Whoops, that kind of interrupts the whole. But where it doesn't justify the return on investment, I'm not comfortable. Let me give you a perfect example. There are a lot of studies out on the return on investment in college education, and they differ, but I've seized upon a couple. There's one by Kaplan, who's known in the area of academic economics. The return on investment for a woman in electrical engineering is 3 times his calculation of the return for a man in the College of Education. I don't have problems right now, based upon what the Dean of Nursing said of the Sinclair School of Nursing, based upon statistics I have seen on engineering, with an increased cost for them, because it is part of the return on their investment. I have a real problem with doing that in areas like education, where we need more educators, and yet we are adding to what is already not as good return on investment. I would like to see a detailed effort by the university on employment, on placement, particularly out of our professional schools, on average salary, because to me, and I'm just speaking for myself, the return on investment is a key component of how I would like to make my decisions on tuition and fee increases. Another thing that concerns me is in the debate over public money, we do receive over $400 million. I think we're asking for 428 or something like that. That's a lot of tax dollars. We have residents and non-residents. I'm not sure my perception is accurate on this, but my perception is that there are a significant level of waivers of non-resident tuition. I understand it for gifted students to an extent. I have a problem with the metro rate at University of Missouri St. Louis, which I told the chancellor. I understand why there's a price point, why we might need to be less than what we have as a non-resident rate. I believe we should investigate that price point, and at the very least, there should be some differential between students who either they pay taxes or their family pay taxes. Even if it is not a large amount, I think the revenue would be considerable. I think we need to look and study that price point. It is too easy in this state to become a resident. I think, and I think, Brian, you and I have talked about this, if I'm correct, we are one of the easiest major public research institutions in the nation for non-residents to become residents. Am I accurate on that, do you think?
I believe that's the widely held view. Yes, sir.
Again, we need to look at this. If the amount and the differential is so great we can't sustain it, then maybe we ought to think of shrinking it, but enforce it more. Because I think we have to show gratitude to the taxpayers of the state of Missouri and the resident students, and not simply translate non-resident students into resident students. I'm not trying to be parochial. I'm not trying to be nativist about it. I want to get the best students, but the idea that it's an either this huge differential or no differential at all, I think, under our difficult financial circumstances, I think that time has come and gone. And I also want to say, and I don't want anyone to misunderstand, this is not a response to the recent editorial. I was thinking along this before, and that has nothing to do with it. But I want to talk about public money. And we see this graph all the time, which is true, where public money is going down and tuition is going up. And I think maybe we as a university even use that as a one-to-one correlation. I think certainly there is a perception by the public there's a one-to-one correlation. And the issue is much more complicated than that. Because, for example, in Bloomberg this last year, private tuition actually went up 3.7% versus 2.9% for public. So if it's just a question of public money, the privates wouldn't be going up more than us. And here's what I want to say on that. On that public money, we have to have, I'll say it right now, more public money to be the university we want to be. And we have to have a larger endowment. And I think we all recognize that. But this is what I want to say, how I feel, and I would suggest maybe the university adopt this view. We are the stewards of selling the University of Missouri. To the extent that we don't sell it, I think that is our responsibility. I think we as a university, when we say we, I'm talking about every member of the Board of Curators, the administration, the chancellors, the faculty, the employees. We are the salesmen. And sometimes when you don't make a sale, you just have to tighten up and bite the bullet. I don't like the fact we haven't made a sale, making a already difficult situation more difficult. It is not just the shrinking size of state government. We have actually lost, by my calculations, which might be wrong, about 2%. We're about 2% less of the discretionary funds in higher education as a whole than we were 10 years ago, while social services has gone up many multiples of that. So we have lost the debate. We have lost that debate with other constituencies. I wouldn't say this, except if I can say one other thing on my belief on tuition. As we increase tuition, however much, as we increase fees, however much, we are blurring the distinction between a public and private university. We are not only making it more difficult for entrepreneurs, like that op-ed I sent around, we are making society more stratified. And I just think that those are the things. I have other things, but I appreciate your indulgence and the board's indulgence. But for me, speaking for me alone, I need to see those kind of things before I vote for more tuition. And I am hoping that we can have a deeper dive into this. And I hope that other members of the board, at least for the long term, consider a serious look at some of these pricing, return on investment, and the way that we seek public funds. I want to say one other thing about public funds. Wayne Good is one of my favorite people in the world and one of the best public servants that I've ever known. And I think Phil would probably agree with that, wouldn't you, Phil? I feel the same way about Kirk Schaefer. The caucuses that elected them to their respective leadership positions have very different prisms and values. And we cannot expect to do things the same way that we did 10 years ago in our relationship with the General Assembly and the governor and get the same result. And again, before I load any of that onto students, I think we have to take a close look at ourselves.
Understand. Thank you.
I'd like to say that I agree with almost everything that David Steelman has said. I think we may come from some different perspectives in many things, and I won't always agree with him, but I do agree on this. I am going to be voting in favor of the tuition increase. It is modest, and I don't think this year we have much choice, but we would fall further behind. I'm also going to vote in favor of the student fee increases, although much more grudgingly, because I think that that's the wrong way for us to address the box that we've been put in. I hope we've not lost the debate, although in recent years we certainly have not succeeded. There are other social needs in the state, but preserving a public education particularly for the sons and daughters of the state and outstaters, if they'll pay for it, is, I think, as important as any of the other social needs. And we have to find other ways. I hope the legislature, and I'm glad that David, with his experience in the legislature, has joined the board. I hope that they will understand the box that the university and higher education in Missouri is being put in. I worry that some people don't continue to have a priority of supporting available and accessible public education nationally and in Missouri. And I hope that the majority of legislators, and I think this governor, and I hope whoever the next governor is, will understand how important accessible, affordable public education is. We're getting away from it, and it is blurring, and we're now more private than we are public. And that's not America. That is how it used to be done in England and other places. You were either part of a religious or part of the upper class, the privileged. But America is not about that. and Missouri should not be about it. So this year, I'm supportive, but I'm encouraging our administration, those that deal directly with the legislature, and for us, to the extent that we're asked to be active in seeking greater public funding for the 4 campuses that we govern, but more broadly for the other 4-year colleges as well. David's been very eloquent, and I could repeat much of what he said, except I think he's got a real good point.
Are there other comments at this time or questions for Brian? I would only say that I would imagine that many of us on the board agree with much of what's been expressed, but that we are faced with certain exigencies today that cannot be ignored. That would be my point. I would hope that we as a group, in the long term meaning over the next year, can get together and discuss these issues in depth and reach a consensus and a goal that works for the system. But thank you very much. With that said, if you know, within the packet, this particular action item comes as a whole, is there an objection to taking this up as a whole? In other words, if in the alternative, if someone wants to segregate from the list an item, then he or she should ask to do that. We will vote accordingly. Well, seeing no request, is there this is with respect to the fiscal year 2016 tuition and required fees and student housing and dining rates as recommended and contained in your packet. Is there a motion to approve these effective beginning with the 2015 summer session?
So move.
Second.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion?
And we're going to vote as a board, is that
As the
correct?
board.
So I'm not recommending anything to the board. Thank you. Cindy?
Cindy, call the roll, please.
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Steelman?
No.
Okay, you have 6 votes in favor, 1 opposed.
Thank you, Brian. On to the supplemental and other related enrollment fees, please.
Thank you, Curator Covington. Before I begin, these are fees that we have talked about extensively. They were the major subject of the telepresence meeting we had in January. And before I begin, I think the President would just like to make a couple comments before I walk you through the supplemental fee recommendations from the administration for 2016.
Thank you, Brian. Members of the board, just wanted to reiterate some of the points that we made in the materials provided on supplemental fees. One of the challenges that we face, and by the way, I don't disagree with what we heard from the curators in terms of need to change the conversation and look at this combination of supplemental fees and tuition in a more holistic way and agree as a board and leadership team in terms of our strategy going forward. So I don't disagree with the comments made. But regarding supplemental fees, one of the challenges that we've got in the University of Missouri system, which is unique to our 4 campuses as compared to the other public institutions, is we have to focus on quality while balancing price and affordability. But we really have to focus on quality because the expectations of our students relative to the education, research opportunities, and applied learning opportunities on our 4 campuses is different than other 4 years or other 2-year publics or privates in the state of Missouri. To do that, we have to have specific fees that go towards that experience, both academic and research-wise. And what's interesting and unique about the supplemental fees is it does give that unique revenue source to those programs that are in need to improve the quality or maintain the quality of those particular programs. So the process that we go through in terms of vetting these supplemental fees is really how do these fees tie back to what your mission is, what your strategy, and how do you increase quality in these particular areas where these fees are proposed. So that's the due diligence that in the background that goes behind these supplemental fees. We'd like nothing better than to not do this, but we are in a situation right now, a financial situation, that we have been so good at being efficient over the years that we run the risk of affecting the quality of our education and our research without these kind of fees. So that was the preamble to Brian's presentation. Back to you.
So the supplemental course fees that are before you today, there are 4 types. These are not subject to the Higher Education Student Funding Act, so these are not subject to Senate Bill 389. There are 4 different types. Increases previously approved by the board that we were asked to phase in over multiple years are brought back for your decision. Increases up to CPI, those are approved, but increases greater than CPI for selected schools and colleges need specific approval from you. And then, as you know, we have in your materials, we reported that we have some new supplemental fees for you to consider this year. All 4 campuses across our enterprise are requesting fees greater than CPI, and for some existing and some new ones. Kansas City is requesting 2 new supplemental fees and to restructure its biological science course fee. And S&T is requesting to restructure all their supplemental course fees in engineering and science courses. So the review process that the president talked about, each campus had to submit these through our budget office to my office, and the president and I reviewed those with our team. They had to demonstrate the need, how it would meaningfully impact students, and help the strategic plan initiatives of each campus. As we told you in January, there were 25 forwarded by the 4 campuses. We eliminated 7, and there are 18 remaining for you to consider today. So we'll begin with the MU campus. The College of Engineering, which we've had discussion about the cost of mounting a college of engineering education here at the MU campus. They're requesting an increase in credit hour on both their excellence fee and their supplemental course fee. The College of Arts and Science, which I know was a long discussion at last year's curator meeting, is a phased-in approach. It's an increase, but I want to point out it does not apply to the 1,000 level courses. So this course fee is only for the ones above 1,000 level, and those are on per credit hour. We're showing these to you here. The remainder of the ones that here at MU are in the College of Human Environmental Sciences. I'm not going to read all these to you. The College of Business, both undergraduate and graduate fee, is also a phased-in piece around accounting standards and AACSB accreditation within the College of Business here. And then the Sinclair School of Nursing, we had quite a discussion at and the dean talked with you about the need for this undergraduate fee at the Sinclair School of Nursing here. The medical school is also requesting an increase in their clinical lab fee just due to costs and trying to maintain what they do with those fees. So those are the MU fees. And I'll walk through briefly the Kansas City supplemental course fee proposals. Again, as I said earlier, the School of Biological Sciences would like to restructure their fee, replace their lab fee to all the courses that they offer at $25 a credit hour. Kansas City would add a new online course fee for everything they offer online. That would mirror what the St. Louis campus does have, an online fee as well. And then the School of Law is asking for a new legal technology supplemental fee at $8 a credit hour for its law students. As noted earlier, S&T is restructuring its course fees and moving to $105 per credit hour for their engineering and sciences, and then an increase, they would like a $6 per credit hour increase in their business and information technology course fee. And finally, on the St. Louis campus, there's 2 fees for the College of Business around undergraduate and graduate course fees. When you look at the total tuition level of St. Louis business, it is well below any of the others in our system. The College of Education course fee has to do with some of their accreditation issues. I do recognize the concern, Curator Steelman, about raising fees on educators. I believe these are ones to try and meet the requirements of accreditation, and it's detailed in your information. And then a nursing undergraduate fee, which would be phased in over 2 years. So those are the 18 fees that made it through the process. Together, they add about $6.8 million to the revenue across the 4 campuses, so it's not a huge revenue driver, but it is not insignificant when you talk about the quality needs of these programs across the 4 campuses. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or call on one of the chancellors sitting around the table to assist if needed.
Questions on this item or comments? You want to say ditto, right?
No, actually, I'm gonna vote for these very, very grudgingly, and I really hope that we have a serious discussion as a board and administration on the continuation of supplemental fees in lieu of a more transparent tuition. And really why I'm voting for them is they're kind of a de facto differential tuition, which I favor, and I think that there are some of them that are critical, and because we have some exigent circumstances. But I really, I know other curators feel like this, because I think these fees are not particularly transparent and make it very difficult for students to plan financially and, more importantly.
I have a related comment to make. So, my role on this board is to represent the students of the University of Missouri, not just our current students, but also future students and prospective students. So for the record, the student leaders on the campuses support the fees that are coming before the board today. As student representative, I support them as well. That being said, I have 2 major concerns with our current pricing strategy. My first concern is that the sticker price is impossible for students to understand. Future students are looking at tuition and campus fees in order to weigh the costs of attending our university. But these students do not get an accurate understanding of supplemental course fees until they receive their first bill. We have students who get that bill, see it as hundreds of dollars in additional costs, and drop out. I understand the necessity of course fees, but it can be a shock to the average student. Is our goal to make college pricing as difficult to understand as in the healthcare industry? A related question is how many course fees are we willing to add to a single class? That increases the confusion. A lab fee, an online fee. Personally, I appreciate that S&T has what they have done to roll small fees into an easy to understand single course fee for engineering classes. Bravo and thank you. Can this be applied on our other campuses? Can we give more thought to this? Okay. So my second concern is that our colleges are starved for resources that would allow them to hire competitively and improve the quality of research, teaching, and service. That being said, I'm concerned that we have created a horse race where a college on one campus looks to the highest priced counterpart as a benchmark for what their course fees should be. As we vote to increase fees, please consider that bumping a course fee for one college on one campus could lead to proposals for matching fees for the other 3 campuses in the future. The bigger question is, should course fees be dramatically different for a nursing student on 2 of our campuses, or a business student when both colleges are accredited? This is something I hope we'll consider moving forward as a board, and I'm not saying that they should be equal. There are merits in situations why they shouldn't, but something to consider as we're moving forward. So, those are my comments.
Thank you, Tracy. Good comments. We appreciate your representation. Thank you.
I had a question, Brian, and for the new person on the board, or one of the 2 new people on the board. Just from procedural standpoint, when a college or school makes a fee request, an increase in fee, at the university level, you mentioned the process, do those fee requests come to us as made by the college or school, or is there a dialogue or an examination or something done at the university level where the fee request that we're presented with may be different than the school or college made, or are there adjustments made at the university level or recommendations made, or does it come to us just as made by the college or school?
No, Curator Graham, it's really a 2-level process. The deans have to get through the campus level review, and some of them don't survive that review, and then they have to come through the system review that the president and I and my staff did, and 7 of them didn't make it even to this discussion. We set a pretty high bar that we have to understand and defend that. We also have talked about down the road there needs to be some accountability that these fees were spent in the way they were asked to the board. I think that our internal audit piece can do that down the road and give comfort to the board that these were spent in the way they were requested by the colleges and schools across the campuses. So I would submit to you, I think it's a pretty rigorous process. I believe there were many more that we didn't see that the campus stopped. And then there were about a quarter of them that we couldn't support and bring forward to you today. So I think we understand your concern about this issue. We also understand that this is the deck of cards we've been dealt, given the state law and the inflation rate and the needs, as the president said, to maintain quality in some of these programs. But I'm also sensitive to what the student representative to the board just said about the comparisons and how we look as a system together. I think they're very poignant and appreciate the input. So I hope that helps you, that
It
it's
does.
not, we didn't just bring you everything that came through.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Brian, what I'm hearing is that, the students don't fully know what the fees are until they get their first bill. And if that's true, that's not good, and certainly I know the university wants to have complete transparency and give them as much notice as possible as to what are the costs. I mean, I think anybody deserves that, and we want to give them that.
Sure.
Maybe, does the state law hinder us from then compiling that information so we know what the number is? Is that what we're saying? Or is there other factors in this that?
Well, it just becomes complex when you don't know what courses the students are going to take, so you don't know if the fee's going to be added or not.
Okay.
If a student drops this class and adds one, it could change their bill. So I think what Tracy was saying was, it just makes the bill very complex. And I think where Curator Steelman's going is maybe we think about differential tuition rather than course fees for the high-cost programs that have a high ROI, or return on investment, might be a better strategy because the pricing will be more uniform and easier to decipher from a student. But I do think our campuses try and put on the website, here's what it would be, but as we add complexity, like supplemental fees, it makes it more complex for sure, for them to understand.
Thank you.
There
So-
other- Oh, go ahead, John, sorry.
So I think it's small comfort that at the system level that we went from 25 to 18. I mean, that isn't close scrutiny. I also see differences in campuses on similar fees where some are starting to charge online or technology fees, others aren't, different departments are or aren't. So again, I echo what others say, that increasing fees every year is not the way to solve problems. This is actually not a down year in our economy. What are we going to do when we do have a bump in the road, as economies do cycle through? And I'm guessing we've never had a tuition or a fee decrease. So what gets put in here on fees only is added to in the future. There's also, I want to raise, because I always raise something along these lines, that when you start to charge additional charges for online or technology, that'll never go away, but if we focus more on e-learning and less on building buildings, and end up realizing that people are going to learn 24/7 at their own pace and sometimes in their own homes from a distance standpoint, one would hope that we would end up providing tools and templates and cross-system sharing of e-learning programs more than we do currently, so that eventually that would reduce the cost as opposed to our charging students extra for that. I do understand that there is a learning curve on use and on building the tools and on doing the templates and also getting the campuses to share their programs across the system. But those are the kinds of things that could have I think, a substantial impact in coming years. So I hate to approve what is a load on when in fact in the not too distant future I would hope that would be a savings. So this year I vote in favor of it, but in future years if you have 18 fee increases, I'm probably going to not be in favor of that.
Thank you, sir.
Brian, I'd like to follow up on what Tracy said. My question is, how does financial aid, a student that needs financial aid, and they are getting loans and grants, and I assume they're filling out their FAFSA, and then the campus financial aid addresses it, how do they know how much to factor in for supplemental fees? Do they take an average? Do they just guess based on major, or how does that work?
Well, they generally have a total cost of attendance, and they work on estimating those fees. Another reason to get this approved earlier is it helps the financial aid offices package and put together, because generally you look at if it's need-based, Pell, and then maybe state grant and that type of thing, and how do you stack that together. So I think they try to put a total cost of attendance marker to it. We can get you more information, but my experience is they estimate that. But you're right, supplemental fees, if the student decides to take a course at supplemental fees raise their cost of attendance, then they have to make adjustments to their financial aid. We can get you a more precise answer, but it's generally a moving target for a number of students as they move through our system. And that's pretty common across higher education, is you work with a budget, but they understand that there's fluctuations, and that can affect their financial aid award, excuse me, if they move into a more expensive program. So we can get you exactly how that works on the campuses for you.
Let me ask one final question. Brian, when you do then put in, approximation for supplemental fees, do you in some way highlight that and point out that these are just approximations, and that if you take certain courses that could increase that number because, do you really spell it out to them so they understand that?
We need to pull what each of the campuses do, because supplemental fees are more prevalent in some programs than others. But I think our financial aid offices are pretty sophisticated. They understand this is not something new. They've been dealing with supplemental fees as total cost of attendance in other areas. It's just something that giving them this pricing news now allows them to look at it. And we spent quite a bit of time for both your student representative and for Curator Steelman trying to approximate how many students this would impact. We pulled that data a lot from our budget offices across the campuses, across the financial aid offices. So again, making the decision now, even if it's not the best decision that you'd feel good about, gives us time to work with our financial aid offices and the students that are going to be affected to help them set their budgets for financial aid for next year.
Other questions or comments?
I guess I have one other question. Some universities and colleges are guaranteeing over a period of time tuition and/or fees. I know that would have a huge impact on the very incremental tuition increases that we've been approving. But has any thought been given to saying to students that the fees that you'll be charged will not increase during a 4-year undergraduate program, assuming might encourage them to get through in 4 years, but any thought about doing that so that the complexity or not knowing what the next fee increase might be, particularly if we end up in dire circumstances violating our census and approving large fee increases, that could have a dramatic effect.
Curator Phillips, the only place I've seen that work or been done is in private schools that have complete tuition setting authority. And I do know of one public university that does that for non-resident students, where they guarantee it for 4 years. But what they do is they raise the tuition the first 2 years to make it flat, to make up for what they're going to give up on the 3rd and 4th year. And then each cohort jumps about 9 to 10%. It's a very effective non-resident strategy. That school did not do it for resident undergraduates because you can't guarantee over the next 4 years what the state support number looks like. And that is a huge piece of the pillar of paying for their education. If you could say the state of Missouri won't cut the state support for the university over the next 4 years, I think we could work on something like that. But generally, where I've seen that done is you raise tuition 10 or 12% for the first 2 years, flatten it out, and then you gain some tuition in the freshman and sophomore year, You lose the typical increases in the junior and senior year. Those are the only two instances I'm aware of where that's done. I think it would be very difficult to do in a volatile state budget situation like the state of Missouri, because I just don't think we can count on stable funding for the next 4 years.
I can see the risk on tuition and how problematic that would be.
Yeah.
It seems to me the risk for fees would be much less and might simplify things for the students, encourage us not to, in the future, rely inappropriately on fees, and encourage them to get through in 4 years.
Okay.
Just a thought.
It's a good thought, and it's a strategy we can certainly talk about.
Further questions or comments for Brian on this item? If not, is there a consensus of the board to take this motion up as a whole? Does anyone object to doing that? Okay. And is there a motion with respect to the fiscal year 2016 supplemental and other related enrollment fees as set out in your materials? Again, effective beginning in 2015 summer session.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Cindy?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
And Curator Steelman?
Back in the fold, yes.
All votes in favor.
That brings us then, Brian, to the new softball stadium, please.
The final action item for the curators on the finance agenda today is a new softball stadium for the Mizzou campus. In your materials is a description of the project. It's a $16 million project, in part because they need to replace 500 parking spaces that this will take out near Hearn Center. They are working on getting the architecture plans done. This will be funded largely by gifts to the athletic department. There's also an allocation of some previously approved debt and debt that was already issued by the university on the athletic department's behalf. And so the recommendation from the administration, I think one of the big pieces to this is NCAA regulations are forcing the fence distances bigger in women's softball. And if you've been or seen the women's softball field over on Cary Frank Drive, it'll take out a street if we extend the fences where it's at. The other piece is the current stadium seats 600. It's overflowing at games. This is a top 15 team, top 20 team in the rankings. This new stadium would seat 1,800, tripling the size of women's softball seating. And that, they do report that they would likely host high school games in this stadium as well as camps, and make it available as they can to others and compete to host the SEC championships here. The stadium they have now is just not adequate for it. So it's 100% gifts and or existing debt. There's no new debt going to be issued for this stadium, and the administration is recommending this. This was approved by the curators as part of the master plan for the MU campus, but each project has to come through for specific curator approval before they can move forward.
Questions of Brian or comments? I have one question that you know I have. 13.5 million of this is shown to be coming from private gifts. I'd like to know whether in this situation, and perhaps campus-wide or system-wide, how much of that needs to be in hand before a project is undertaken or at least firmly committed? I think that's the best way I can ask the question. I assume we don't have $13.5 million already, or do we?
No, and I invite Chancellor Lofton to join in, but I did talk with Gary Ward and both Rhonda Gibbler about this. The SEC contract will bring new revenues to the athletic department, the television contract, but they also have a multi-year capital gift from a large organization that has made good on their pledge to the athletic department. That's one source. They believe that they will have all but maybe 1 to 2 million of all the gifts in hand by the time the project completes. And that includes paying for replacement parking. It's not just building the softball stadium. They've got to replace 500 parking places, so that makes the stadium more expensive, given where it's going to be located. But I would invite Chancellor Lofton, if I misspoke, or if there's anything you'd like to add to that about the prospects of it. But I think they have another number of ways to pay for this stadium as it embarks, but they already have 3 to 4 million of gifts in hand.
Just a comment to add to what Brian said. We have pledges in place which our history suggests will be fulfilled for a large fraction of the projected cost here. And we have a strong record of support going forward for this program, so I'm confident. But in the worst case scenario, the backstop is there, as Brian said. We anticipate a number I can't share publicly, but some increase in our revenue this year from television because of the SEC network success. And so we believe we have the resources in hand should we fail to achieve the fundraising success we expect, to be able to backstop the project for at least the time required to get those gifts in place.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
Could I make a comment? I just would like to request that Chancellor Bowen Lofton, as any other athletic department projects come forward, we have an accounting of how much we've got in hand, the expectation relative to additional TV revenue that's coming in before we consider the next project, so that we can keep track of where we are and make sure that we don't overextend ourselves for projects by double counting some money that we have in hand, or have, betting on to come relative to additional donations. Thanks.
Anything further with respect to this item? If not, is there a motion to approve the new softball stadium project for the University of Missouri-Columbia at the figures that are included in the motion? As a matter of fact, of private gifts of $13,500,000 and debt financing of $2,500,000 for a total funding of $16 million.
Move approval.
I'd second that motion.
Any other discussion? Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cupps?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Okay, all votes in favor.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Is there a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee for the
You
board?
are-
We don't
you-
have to.
No.
Sorry.
At this time, we will recess the public session and go into executive session, and we will reconvene at approximately 1:45.